Today is August 22nd, 2024. The national average interest rate is a very reasonable 6.5%. And now that the market update is out of the way, we're going to talk about the recent National Association of Realtors settlement and all that it means for the real estate community at large. Let's do it. Now, this settlement is referring to an agreement reached by the National Association of Realtors to resolve lawsuits relating to commission. Unless you're actively in the buying or selling world right now, there's a good chance you haven't heard about this. Only 37% of respondents in this survey had heard anything about the settlement or the changes that are now sweeping the industry. So what's the background on the settlement? Well, NAR and some large real estate brokers were essentially accused of practices that allegedly kept real estate commission fees artificially high. Let's look at some historical practices. So first off, typically the vast majority of real estate agents work entirely on commission and commission only. This commission, of course, is usually based on a percentage of the home's sale price. When the house sells, usually the seller would be paying a commission. This is often anywhere from 5 to 6%, and that would be split between the buyer agent and the seller's agent. Now again, it's important to understand that this has never been mandatory. It's always been negotiable, although a lot of this lawsuit basically stems from consumers feeling like this aspect was not adequately explained to them. Now, NAR's involvement in this, the National Association of Realtors, what they are is a powerful trade association that sets rules and standards for real estate agents when they're listing their homes on the multiple listing service, the MLS. So what was the actual issue? Well, the class action lawsuits that were brought against NAR were primarily centered around allegations that their commission practices were anti-competition and were resulting in inflated costs for consumers. Number one, alleged anti-competitive practices. So first, fixed commission structures. The lawsuits were arguing that NAR's rules effectively mandated that sellers pay a fixed percentage of the sale price as a commission, which was then split between the seller and buyer's agent. The structure allegedly was preventing price competition among agents. And then commission steering. Plaintiffs claim that NAR's rules and practices encouraged steering, where a buyer's agent would steer clients away from properties offering lower commission rates. This practice, again, allegedly discouraged sellers from offering lower commission. From my perspective, more so the issue here would be agents who are either maybe a little bit shady or don't necessarily know what they're doing and don't have a solid grasp of what the actual rules and actual ethics are. First of all, if someone's steering a client away from a certain house because they're not offering a commission, they're just flat out not doing their job correctly. This is not something that NAR was mandating. It's not something that was encouraged by any means. I think that boils a little bit more down to the personal agent not necessarily being the best at their job or the best at, putting their clients' interests first. Number two, lack of transparency. So they said that this was an opaque commission practice. The lawsuits contended that the way commissions were set up and disclosed lacked transparency. Sellers often did not fully understand that they were paying both their agent and the buyer's agent, nor could they easily negotiate these fees. Again, I see a little bit of truth here, but really I think it more so boils down to often these were not adequately explained. And really, again, I think that's more so a training issue than anything that needed, legislation to necessarily fix. Number three, the impact on consumers. So the lawsuits were saying that this resulted in increased costs for home sellers, the central claim being that NAR's rules kept commission rates artificially high, thereby increasing the overall cost for home sellers, and this lack of flexibility in negotiating commissions was seen as a significant financial burden on sellers. And then with that, reduced competition. Plaintiffs argued that the inability to negotiate commissions freely stifled competition among real estate agents. In a more competitive market, commission rates might have been lower, benefiting consumers through reduced transaction costs. So again, my perspective on this, though, I have to disagree here a little bit that this was artificially just keeping commission rates really high. There has always been some pretty serious competition between agents, especially when it comes to your offered rate. So what was the legal basis of this lawsuit? The legal basis of the lawsuit first was antitrust violations. So the class action lawsuits were rooted in antitrust laws. Plaintiffs claim that NAR's rules violated the Sherman Antitrust Act by fostering a collusive environment where commission rates were kept high due to a lack of competition. Again, I don't really agree with this one. I think there's always been a lot of competition with agents. Did you know that 90% of real estate agents don't make it through the first year? And then of those ones who do make it through, another 90% of them will not make it through the next 5 years in this career. And that really boils down to how competitive it can be to get clients. Class action status was the next legal basis. These lawsuits were brought as class actions, meaning they represented a group of plaintiffs who were similarly affected by these practices. This included potentially millions of home sellers who had paid commissions under these contested rules. So what were the outcome expectations that came along with these lawsuits? The plaintiffs were seeking market reforms that would allow more freedom and transparency in how commissions are negotiated and disclosed. They aimed to create a real estate market where consumers could benefit from lower commission rates and more competitive practices. There was also an outcome expectation of financial compensation. In addition to market reforms, the class actions often sought financial compensation for the alleged overcharges that some home sellers paid due to these practices. So this has all been settled at this point and has taken effect. So what are the actual changes that came about from the settlement? First up, rule changes. So commission negotiation flexibility. The settlement requires NAR to eliminate or modify rules that restrict the ability of sellers and agents to negotiate commission rates. This includes any policies that implicitly or explicitly fix commission splits. Again, I struggle to see a basis for this because this was always something that was negotiable. Now, the second result of the settlement was MLS information changes. This is the big one, probably the biggest one that has really been the most scrutinized and is having the biggest waves across the community. So up until this point in the MLS where properties are listed, it would let you know what buyer agency fee they were offering, right? So it would say this seller is offering a 2% fee to buyer agents, this one's offering 2.5%, this one's offering 1.5% or 3%, whatever. Up until now, agents were able to go on the MLS and see what was being offered. Now, that is no more. It is not listed in the MLS, and it cannot in any way be listed anywhere on the MLS if a seller is offering a buyer agency fee. Now, the reason for this change was to promote transparency, but I personally don't see how this is promoting transparency at all. Previously, we would be able to see when we went in the MLS what buyer agency fee was being offered and would immediately be able to let our clients know if it was already being covered and if they might need to bring any more money to the closing. Now it's a couple steps more of reaching out to the agent, finding out if a fee is being offered, and then going back to the client so they can then do the calculations on what the house is offering versus what the agent is charging. What this is also resulting in is that more sellers are refusing to offer any buyer agent commission, or they are substantially lowering what they would have otherwise offered. Now, I completely understand the need for sellers to have more transparency, to understand more about what they're signing up for when it comes to commissions. Absolutely, right? However, the last few years, we've been in an extremely competitive seller's market. It is significantly harder than it has ever been for someone to purchase a home, especially a first-time home buyer. And I think that this is, at the end of the day, extremely damaging on the first-time home buyers more than anybody else. The next result of the settlement is a buyer agreement is required before showings. I agree with this one, and I don't, beforehand, if somebody gave me a call and they said, hey, I don't have an agent, I'd like to see this house, will you meet us out there? I could go and do that. Now I have to have some sort of written agreement with them before doing that. On one hand, I don't think this is entirely necessary. And it definitely can put a little bit of a roadblock and slow things down in an already quick market. However, on the other hand, it does present another opportunity to make sure consumers are better engaged and better understand all the complexities of this process. So personally, I'm for this change. The other result of the settlement was really just greater clarity for consumers. Real estate agents must provide a more detailed information to consumers about how commissions work and the options available for negotiating them. This includes explaining the services provided in exchange for the commission fees. So again, this makes sense to me, right? I always, as someone who calls themselves the knowledge broker, I've always thought it's extremely important for consumers to be more educated about the real estate world than they are. I also have no problem with agents being pushed to explain why do they charge this rate and what actual services are they getting out of it, especially from someone who prides themselves on offering a lot of different services to my clients. So I don't have a problem with this one. Overall though, I think a lot of these changes were not necessary, or more so, were not gone about in the correct way. Hiding the commission that's being offered from a seller on the MLS, I don't think that's helping anyone. It's making things more difficult for buyer agents and for the sellers who do choose to still offer a buyer agent commission because it's likely to help their house sell faster in some ways. It's not even showing that they're doing this, right? It's now hiding a potential marketing tactic from these sellers who, should have the choice whether or not they want to offer it. So if you are a buyer and a seller in the market right now, or gonna be soon, or anytime in the future now that this is in effect, let's just take a look at the key takeaways from this. So first of all, sellers, when you're meeting with an agent, make sure they're explaining to you what they charge, what services you get for what they charge, and make sure they can explain the reasons why you may or may not want to offer a buyer agency fee. Now and always, you have the option to offer nothing, to offer 1%, 2%, 100%, whatever you want to offer. Make sure the agent that you're choosing to work with can explain why you might want to decide one thing over the other. If you are offering a buyer agent commission, or if you're a buyer and you have a buyer agent who's going to need to be paid for their services, that is no longer being listed in the MLS. There's now extra steps involved to find out if that is a factor when you're looking at properties. In response to this, a lot of lenders are already coming up with ways to roll commission into their into loans if need be. And also I'm seeing more and more often that this is just becoming part of a negotiation when submitting an offer, right? If a seller is not offering any buyer agency fee, in some situations, the buyer might come in and make an offer asking for it at that time, and it's up to the seller to decide if those offer terms warrant then paying a buyer agent commission. This will hopefully develop into the average consumer having a much better awareness and knowledge of what's happening in the industry, and really understanding more what their options are, and just being able to make better and more informed decisions moving forward. So I'm hopeful at the end of the day that this will be a good thing. I think a lot of these changes were long overdue. I think a lot of them were not necessary and don't necessarily help the little guy, but overall I'm feeling optimistic and I think we're going to work through this. Thank you for watching. I hope this was helpful. My name is Hunter Latown. I am a full-time realtor and associate broker in New Hampshire, Maine, and Massachusetts. Check out my website, realestatewithhunter.com, and let me know what video topic I should cover next month. Have a good one.